Hello, I'm Alexis Badenmayer with Regeneration International and your host of the Farmers and Ranchers for a Green New Deal podcast. Today, we will be doing a live taping of our podcast with Carrie Balkcom of American Grassfed Association. But before we start, we have a special video excerpt for you of a new movie about concentrated animal feeding operations, factory farms. It's called Right to Harm, and we are screening this video now. We have a link in the comments section where you can access a free showing of the video, and we'd like to invite you to an upcoming panel discussion about it. So let's roll the clip from Right to Harm.
The dairy CAFOs operate in a very different model than what most people really understand dairy farming to be. These operators bring in the food to those cows. The manure and urine are washed down with drinking water and pumped into a manure pit. It then is pumped into semi-tanker trucks that then transports that out to the field. That is then dumped into a pumping station, which then pushes that manure out into the field where it is then applied by a tractor. In an area with shallow soils and cracked bedrock, spreading liquid animal waste on a field is probably the worst thing that can be done.
Residents in one Kewaunee County community say the ongoing well contamination problems there have gotten worse.
The manure runoff flowed directly into her well, leaving her family without clean water for 16 days.
All the dishes were washed in pure manure.
So that was a clip of a new documentary, Right to Harm. And the Organic Consumers Association is offering an opportunity to watch this movie for free and for you to join us for a panel discussion about the subject of Right to Harm, which is concentrated animal feeding operations, factory farms. But today we are going to talk about the solutions to that problem. We are joined today for the Farmers and Ranchers for a Green New Deal podcast by Carrie Balkcom. And Carrie is the executive director of the American Grassfed Association. AGA is the national multi-species entity organized to protect and promote grass-fed and pasture-based farmers and ranchers. The association has a third-party on-farm certification program. And Carrie is a rancher herself. She grew up on a Florida cattle ranch, and she stayed connected to her roots, but has been doing work for ranchers all over the country. And so we're going to, welcome, Carrie. Hi, how are you?
Thank you. I'm fine, thank you. Thank you for having me. I was telling somebody earlier, everybody seems to be working out of their basement. I'm working out of my attic, so I have some natural light. But thank you for inviting me on. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for making the time to talk with us today. So, Carrie, you joined on behalf of the organization, American Grassfed, the coalition Farmers and Ranchers for the Green New Deal. So I'd like to start our conversation by talking about what is the Green New Deal, why it's relevant to your membership of ranchers, and what your thoughts are about its potential and possibilities. So the Green...
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I'll just for folks who haven't yet read the Green New Deal, I'll just let you all know the Green New Deal is the first federal proposal on climate change to include food and farming. So before this, agriculture's impact on climate and its potential as a solution was completely unrecognized. So the Green New Deal is the first time that Congress, or some people in Congress at least, are calling for working collaboratively with farmers and ranchers in the United States to remove pollution and greenhouse gas emissions from the agricultural sector as much as is technologically feasible, including by supporting family farming, by investing in sustainable farming and land use practices that increase soil health, and by building a more sustainable food system that ensures universal access to healthy food. So Carrie, can you tell us what your first reaction was to the Green New Deal?
Well, my first reaction was it's about time that somebody started bringing the farmers and the ranchers into the conversation. So I was pleased to see that. Anytime you start something new, of course, you're going to have some, pushback, lots of questions about, because it's no longer status quo. It was very interesting from our perspective and our farmers and ranchers, because a lot of them are already making those changes to address it and to look at what's going on. So I think that for us, it was the organization. It was really interesting to see all of the different dynamics that were in play, because a lot of the guys, we're already doing all this. We're already adapting, and whether they call it climate change or just adapting to what's going on around them or whatever it was, but it was being addressed at a federal level, which hadn't been done before, only in small dribs and drabs here and there. So we were pleased to see somebody taking this on and saying, wait a minute, let's take a look at this. And I think that was important.
And for the American Grassfed Association and your members of grass-fed producers, can you tell us how the practices that you and your members use contribute to soil health and carbon sequestration? Why is this part of the solution?
Well, even if we don't call it that, because we don't allow the use of we can use pesticides and herbicides, but not because we're not organic. So we use them judiciously. But there's no antibiotics use and no added hormones. The animals have to stay on pasture, so they're not confined in factory farms. So you're not working with the behemoth mounds of manure and urine and stuff. It's all being spread back on the land the way it's supposed to be done. Animals are not fed a diet that makes them sick. You're not having to use all those things that keep them well. It takes people back to the land. It takes people back to the way things were for many, 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 many years. And it's kind of leveling the playing field and finding markets for these folks that are doing it that way, to supporting rural economies, to keeping people like at the little town that I grew up in, keeps the local hardware store open, keeps the local auto parts and farm supply store open, keeps those little stores open, and keeps everybody in kind of a nice way of keeping things moving through those channels. So I was pleased to see somebody all of a sudden realizing that was important. Now, USDA will say and has said to us in meetings that 90% of their constituency is our farmers. So we were getting 10% and putting in 90%. And me being Southern, I can say that didn't add up. So these small family farms and these farmers that are trying to change things and work within the system, they needed a new system. So I think this was the first time that the Green New Deal kind of addressed that and said it's time to take another look at the way our policy is being done. So
absolutely. So I think that meat, in some ways justifiably so, if you're talking about factory farmed meat that goes through the massive slaughterhouses, it's gotten a bad rap in terms of its climate impact. But that can't be attributed to grass-fed beef. What's the difference between the climate emissions from the industrial factory farm slaughterhouse supply chain and what your members are doing?
Well, we've done very little as far as research on that. We did have one farm, White Oak Pastures in Georgia, who did a study on climate sequestration on their greenhouse sequestration on their farm, carbon sequestration on their farm, and it's available online. We can send it to you, as opposed to the factory farms and what's coming off of them. It's just knowing that when you drive by a behemoth animal factory and see no grass and no birds and no trees and stuff, and then you look at these wonderful small family farms and see all of those things, and the consumer starts to recognize, wait a minute, there is a different way, and let's support that. So that's it. As far as research, it's out there. We haven't done a lot of that. OCA has. So we kind of err to you all to send us that information, because we're we're working with the farmers to try and make sure that their products are getting to market, and we're developing new markets for them. So the OCA has the researchers and has done a lot of that for us. So we thank you.
Well, I'll answer my own question then, because I think it's really important to point out that the greenhouse gas emissions that come from cows, for instance, pigs and chickens, it's actually more about what they're fed and how their waste is kept, disposed of. We saw a little bit of that in the clip from the Right to Harm movie. U.S. greenhouse gas emissions in agriculture are about 9% of the total of U.S. greenhouse gas emissions across all sectors. Agriculture is a relatively small amount, but then when you think about what a polluter we are in terms of fossil fuel use, then 9% attributed to agriculture is actually pretty significant. So I think for most countries, it would be an even smaller amount. Agriculture would have a tinier footprint. But because almost nearly all of our animals are confined, and they're fed a primarily corn and somewhat soy diet, but certainly not grass. As you described, the animal factories, the factory farms don't have a blade of grass. That's what defines a factory farm or a CAFO. And so most of the greenhouse gas emissions are actually the use of synthetic fertilizer to grow the corn and the soy. And then the other half is the waste, the emissions that come off the waste that's pooled in manure pits. Do you want to say more about that, Carrie?
Sorry, Alexa, you're freezing up on me, but I'm trying to figure out where to jump in. But
okay, you might be having a slight disruption in your internet, but the nice thing about StreamYard is that this recording will be smooth. So when you take the floor, you can speak, and if there are interruptions in what you're able to hear me say or what I'm able to hear you say, the recording will come out okay. But I think your internet connection is coming back because I'm seeing your face more clearly now.
Okay. Well, the one thing that I didn't bring up, because you're so much better versed on some of the things than I am, because we look at markets and we look at those kind of things, is that we look at inputs. And when you have animals on pasture, you don't have the inputs of having to haul feed to them. Their feed is at their feet. And it has to be done very well so that the animals are living good lives. The animals are not being force-fed. They're eating when they need to eat, not when we think they should eat, so that they have a different herd mentality as far as, animals, ruminant animals like to eat right before dark so that they give off good pheromones. So that they're healthy, that their predators think they're healthy instead of being, sick or starved. So all of those things. So they're in rhythm with their own nature, and with ruminants, and especially with dairy, which is a big thing. We've got dairy standards now, and with pork, so we allow them to use their natural behavior. So we're not force feeding them things that they're not supposed to be eating. So that's an input that we don't bring on the farm. And we're not trucking things in, and so those are things as well that need to be brought up. And these animals, they need more space, so that's another thing. Keeping open spaces and wildlife and birds and predators and whatever, so that everybody lives together in a nice harmonious setting.
Well, I think you raise a really important issue, which is farmer livelihoods and the ability of a rancher or a farmer to make a living. It is an advantage to be utilizing the solar power of perennial grasses as opposed to, farming all the corn and soy that an animal needs to be kept inside in unhealthy conditions, plus all of the animal drugs that are used in that scenario. I have a farmer friend in Maryland here, and he has a fairly small operation. His farm is less than 250 acres, and he has a beautiful way of rotating his organically grown corn and soy, which he produces for his poultry, with his ruminant animals, his cows. And he says he hasn't spent a dime on a vet. And I was at his farm for a farm tour. And this is Nick Marivelle, by the way, Nick's Organic Farm. I should let people know who I'm talking about. So he looks up to the horizon to the end of his farm. He says, "Oh, it looks like one of my cows is calving." And I'm like, "Well, don't you have to run out there and and like the farmer has to be there for that, right?" He's like, "No, they just take care of it."
Yep.
And it's just amazing. You know, we most consumers don't really realize that it could be that it's sort of like it's that easy. You just, like how. Tell me more about that, about the animal welfare benefits of these grass-fed systems.
Well, when you let ruminant animals or pigs or chickens do what they were designed and ecologically designed to do, then you take the need for us to intervene away. And I was speaking at Oxford several years ago, and one lovely woman there, she said, "I think it's our need to shepherd, that we're so trained that we have to take care of these things." And then I have a very dear friend who has a ranch in Florida. He said, "No, the animals are here to take care of us. So as long as we leave them alone," I mean, there are some instances where, of course, you want to intervene, and you should, but for the most part, leave them alone, and they will come home. and as long as you provide for them what they're supposed to have, which is the 5 freedoms, and also what they're supposed to eat and how they're supposed to eat it, then nature pretty much does a good job of making sure that happens in the right way and at the right time.
Excellent. What are the 5 freedoms?
I knew you were going to ask me that in a minute. I said it's freedom from fear, freedom from harm, freedom. I'll look it up and I'll get it back to you in just a second. But yeah, it's something that I learned years ago, and I'll bring it up for you.
So that's a way of framing the needs of an animal, and it's essentially what you don't want to do it to them, rather than what you need to do for them. If you create that type of environment where they're not under stress and they're not in need, then they'll naturally be able to have higher welfare than an animal.
Yeah. It's freedom from hunger and thirst, food and water. All animals deserve access to clean water and a well-balanced, nutritious diet, which is what they're designed to eat. Freedom from discomfort, which is shelter. Freedom from pain, injury, and disease. So if they do need those things, it's a freedom that you have to give them. Freedom to express normal behaviors, exercise, to be able to move, and freedom from fear and distress. So those are the 5 freedoms. So we think that animals on pasture, which is where they're supposed to be living and what they're supposed to be doing, and expressing natural behaviors, whether it be poultry or pigs or dairy or ruminant animals, which is where AGA started with ruminants, and now we've got dairy standards and we've got pork standards. So we're multi-species at this point, and so we have standards for ruminants, which are multi-chambered stomach animals, and that's beef, bison, goat, and lamb. Those are the ones that we certify, and the others that have multi-chambered stomachs are considered wild game, so we don't go there. It's just animal agriculture, domesticated animals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let's make a plug now for your producers and the way that we can identify the label for American Grassfed. So this is a certification similar to organic that creates, you earn a label through certification. It's American Grassfed, a green label with white blades of grass. Mm-hmm. And I understand that you can search for local producers on your website. You have a map up where you can put in your locality and find ranchers and farmers that meet American Grassfed standards close to you. I believe Natural Grocers is one of the large grocery store chains nationally that sells American Grassfed products. What are other ways that consumers can connect and access these products?
Well, very few major retailers are carrying our seal at this point because and this is a little, but anyway, 85% of the grass-fed you find in the marketplace is probably from offshore, and that has to do with price. And it's also some labeling issues that imported products that come into the United States, and if it's repackaged, be labeled product of the USA. So you have to ask and you have to look for our seal. Natural Grocers stepped out of them and said, yeah, we're going to carry AGA product. So we were very pleased with that, and we applaud them. Our certification is on farm every 15 months. And the reason we do it every 15 months instead of every 12 months is that way we get to see the farm at different times of the year. An inspector goes to the farm and, takes a look around. They know what they're looking for. They're good inspectors. They don't work for us. They're not paid by us. They're independent. So that's important. And each farm is inspected, and then they are allowed to use our seal on their packaging. And like you said, it's a little white seal with 4 blades of grass on it. And it's becoming more and more and more in the marketplace. And we do have the map on our website. Thanks for the plug. But, we started in 2003 when the government said they were going to allow grass-fed label to be 20% fed grain, given antibiotics and hormones confined, and use the grass-fed label claim. So we went, wait. This is probably not what the consumer has in mind. So we petitioned and worked with the government for about 5 years. And they finally said, we're going to only address what the animal eats, not where it's been fed or how it's been raised. So we asked if we could do our own third-party certification program. And they said, as long as it meets or exceeds our standards, yes. So we started certifying in 2007. And so we've added and added and added to this point. So, and then in 2000, that was 2007. And then in 2014, I believe, we added dairy. And then in 2016, we added pork. So you'll start to see those on packages as well. But we've been around for a long time. We do not, the government has a grass-fed label through USDA, but we don't, it's all done by affidavit. They never see the farm, and we see every farm. So.
Yeah, I think that that's a good model for the producers to essentially own the label, but agree to these very, very stringent standards and with very stringent monitoring. We've certainly had trouble with the USDA organic seal because we don't have the highest standards. And now we have competing standards in the marketplace coming up, like the Real Organic Project and Regenerative Organic, because USDA has failed to adopt standards that consumers really agree to, especially the idea that animals should minimally have access to the outdoors if they're going to be called organic. So I also have to say, Organic Consumers Association has always promoted the USDA organic seal because that's how you avoid genetically modified organisms, you avoid pesticides, you avoid the worst practices of factory farming, antibiotics, animal drugs, etc. But you can do better than the organic seal. And so that's why it's been so important and why we've been so encouraged by the growth of certifications like American Grassfed Association, because really you want to look for that higher level of, especially for animal products, to make sure that your animals were raised on pasture rather than, fed organic grain.
Well, there are some other organizations that have a grass-fed certification program, and but the thing about the grass-fed label is that USDA has 16 employees to oversee 750,000 labels a year to do the paperwork for those things. We work very closely with USDA. We have meetings with them quarterly. We talk to them all the time. And so we understand the constraints that they're under, and we appreciate that, but we think it's time to, and that's the other thing is you and I talked earlier about incremental change is just in cutting it. It's time for transformational change, which is, if you actually delve into, which I have not done as much as I would like to, the Green New Deal is that it's transformational. It's not incremental, because incremental has been going on for 10 years, 12, 15 years now. So we need to step it up a little bit, guys. So that's why we're glad to see it.
Thank you. Well, I'll make a pitch for the Green New Deal at this point, because the Green New Deal really was so radical when it was introduced after the 2018 election, because instead of saying, we'll reduce greenhouse gas emissions as it's economically feasible to do so, it said, well, actually, science demands that we get to net zero greenhouse gas emissions over the next 12 years by 2030. So, science isn't going to change. So we can do this, as it's convenient to us, or we can do it on the level that science demands, so that we don't see the drastic economic and environmental and human costs that will come with the type of greenhouse or climate disasters that we've seen, like the destruction of the town of Paradise, the destruction of the town of Panama City in Florida, where you're from, Carrie. So yeah, we can't pretend like climate isn't happening. We need to act boldly. And I think that it's bringing it back to the grass-fed issue. It's climate change is not going to be the greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture are not going to be significantly reduced by modifying the factory farm system. Mm-hmm. Or modifying the system that requires all the animals to go through just a couple of slaughterhouses. We need to move to a strictly grass-based system for ruminants, and ideally we will integrate pigs and chickens into those systems. So before we went live, you were telling me about an interesting program that you all have launched to encourage your grass-fed beef producers to integrate other animals into their systems.
Yeah, we've been working very closely, and for several years we have a conference every year. We work with Holistic Management International, and then also with Bovera Coalition, and it's all about biodiversity. It's all about permaculture, and instead of just having one species on your farm, to start showing farmers, look, add this and see what happens, and add this species and see what happens. And it's for somebody who has always raised cattle on their farm, which is my family, is that to add another species is like, what am I going to do there? But when you look at really, really, really well-run biodiverse farms, it doesn't just include one species, it's multi-species. So, for multi-generational farmers, such as myself and others who have just, this is what we do, who all of a sudden say, okay, we're going to do something else. Like, wait. So, but for the new generation of farmers that are coming in, and these are what we call non-imprinted farmers. They don't have grandma and grandpa and great-grandma and great-grandma, in their ear all the time saying, that's not the way we do things. They're figuring this out on their own. And they want a new way. They want a new deal. They want to figure this out. So we're going to be there to help them. And we've been working very closely with some wonderful homeopathic vets and holistic vets that are telling them, no, you don't need all these drugs. You don't need all these other things. Here's how you can do it holistically. So this is another way. We concentrate on the soils, and we should, because that's the bedrock of everything. But once you put those animals on there, how do you treat them holistically and with homeopathy so that they remain healthy? And in that, it's a whole system. It's not just taking soil over here and animals over here. It's bringing them together and showing how that works. So, I could talk for days, as you know, but I think it's really important.
Well, I would love to hear more about homeopathy and animal care. I recently interviewed Kim Elia. He's a homeopathic practitioner for human beings. And we talked about homeopathic options for dealing with viruses like COVID-19. Can you give me just one example of how you might treat an animal on a farm using homeopathic methods?
Well, we have and I'm going to give a plug here too, is that Dr. Susan Beal, she's a homeopathic vet. She did a 4-hour breakout at our conference. And one of the guys that walked out said it was like drinking from a water hose or fire hose, is what he said, because it was just taking in so much. Let's just say you get an outbreak of pink eye, which can be caused from dust, or it can come in from if you're bringing calves or things like that. The first thing you would normally do in a situation like that is to reach for the antibiotics and give them a shot, and then they're better. But then when you listen to Susan and you listen to these other homeopathic veterinarians, these practitioners, they say, wait a minute. There's a timeout. Let's look at this holistically, or how that happened, and let's look at the problem and not give it a quick solution. It's of course, growing up on a farm, unless you were bleeding or there was a bone showing, you just got dusted off and sent back outside. So I think we need to look at these animals. Let's take care of them and not just reach for the syringe or the pill. And that's what these vets are doing. And there's a whole society of them now. So we're very pleased to have that as part of our and we're getting ready to do some webinars. I'll make a plug for that too, but it'll be a little while because we've had to realign the way we work and do things in the last 90 days, as we all have, but they'll be upcoming. And there's some books out there which we can show you as well and tell you about as well.
Wow, that's great. We can't wait to hear more about that. So keep us posted and we'll share through our Facebook network. I should ask you now how your ranchers are faring with COVID-19 and the pandemic and the economic shutdown. How has this impacted the businesses that you represent?
It's interesting, and this is anecdotal because we have not been able to track it. My new word for this time is nimble, and being nimble. We have producers who have contacted us looking for supply because their demand is up 500%, where people are, it's wonderful. The issue is that our producers depend on small slaughterhouses, processing plants. These small processing plants are only set up to do maybe one shift a day. And for them to add another shift to help bring in more animals to make up for the big plants closing, because our farmers don't go to big plants. They just can't. They're not set up to do that. It's overtime. These inspectors is almost $100 an hour. So if you want an extra shift, that could be $800 a day. And that's above and beyond all of the costs. So Senator Moran and Senator Bennett have introduced an act to help offset those overtime costs so that these small processing plants can pick up the slack and do that. A lot of the producers that were dependent on restaurants, they were devastated. But through the networking that they've done and being, again, nimble, they are finding ways to move those animals so that they don't lose their livelihood. Now, a lot of these people have a lot of money on the books from the restaurant closing, but at least those animals aren't not being utilized. And the other thing is too, and this is something that was pointed out in a couple of sessions that I had a while ago, is that animals on pasture don't need to be. I mean, the window on slaughtering animals in feed yards, they have to go that day. They have to go this day. They have to go this day. Pigs have to go, and you've seen the devastation with these pigs, that they were just euthanizing them. Where a pig on pasture it's not mandatory that they get processed on this day. They can wait a couple of other weeks, and so hopefully we can get some relief for these guys through the processors, and hopefully through the networking that we've been able to do with our producers, that they've been able to find people who are already set up for online or for on-farm sales, and they can take these extra animals and utilize them and not have to do what you've seen on a major scale with feedlot animals. So I'm thrilled.
Yeah, that sounds like a really good solution. How can we help support that bill? What could we do? Like pick up the phone, call our senator or our congressman? What do we ask for?
Well, we just put out a bunch of Facebooks, and you can go to our website, and I think Neil's got it up. Is that they need co-sponsors on this bill, and we'll get that out to you. But if we can get co-sponsors in the next stimulus round or appropriations round, if we can get relief to these small processors, and because let's just say you're a processor and you've only been working one shift for 5 days a week or 6 days a week, if you add 2 more shifts, that's $1,600 a day. So if we can get some of that taken care of, then the processing plant can add extra workers back in, and some of those workers are coming from those other shuttered plants, are very skilled, and would rather be working than collecting unemployment or not collecting anything and working in these smaller plants. So we can have a link to the bill. It's Senator Moran in Kansas. Thank you very much. And then Senator Bennett reached out. So we need co-sponsors. And I think we've been doing Neil's got some things out there now, but I'll make sure that it gets posted.
Great. Well, I'll ask everyone listening to please go to the American Grassfed Association website and look for information about that bill. And I promise that Organic Consumers Association will share your information so that we can get our members to take action. So I can't help but address the many posts on the feed right now that are advocating for recognizing I was about to say human rights of animals, but that's not necessarily it, but the rights of animals. And and so what's your perspective on that? What justifies, using animals for food? And interesting to me is also how animals fit into the larger agricultural system. Because yesterday I interviewed Dave Chapman. He's a tomato grower in Vermont. And I asked him, he grows intensively on 2.5 acres. And he's able to serve the market in Boston from where he lives in Vermont. So it's 2.5 acres, but it's an intensely productive situation. And I asked him what he did for fertility of his soil to make that work, because you have to be treating your soil really well to get it to produce more than, he's been farming for decades to get it to continuously be that productive. And of course, it turns out that he was getting manure from a local dairy farmer and from a local poultry farmer. And that was what was giving him the rich compost that produced the vegetables. So, honestly, I became a vegetarian in 1990 because I learned that the rainforests were being cut down in the Amazon to make way for cattle grazing, which is a huge reason why we've lost so much of the rainforest. So I'm very closely aligned to the vegan and vegetarian cause because that was my first reaction. I was like, well, I don't need to eat meat if it's damaging to the environment. And it's only recently that I've learned that there are actually ways to farm where you don't have to be destructive to the environment. You can actually be restorative to the environment. But I think I may have been missing a little. And certainly there are great practitioners of veganic agriculture who, for instance, utilizing municipal compost to grow vegetables intensively. You can definitely do it. But there are advantages to these integrated systems that use livestock. So I'd be happy to have your thoughts on it, on the ethics and circumstances of animal agriculture.
Well, in a biodiverse, in a permaculture situation, using animals to impact the earth, there's 40% of our in the United States, there's land that can't be farmed for vegetables or fruits. So it's pasture or it's open space. So animals have been on that land for years, eons. If you look at the great herds of buffalo and those animals, now we've messed things up, as you know. But as far as the ethics, if you're talking about eating animals that we've raised, that's a whole nother subject. I have no. If people tell me they don't eat meat, that's fine. But there's land that if you take the animals off of the land that they're supposed to be on, and not put them into situations that they're not supposed to be in, then that's an issue. That's a problem. But you can't take grasslands in the Colorado or Florida or wherever and plow it under and grow vegetables on it and expect that to be part of a healthier earth, because that's not the way it's designed to be. So I think pairing the animal with the land, and we get these calls with farmers, what breed or what species should I put on my land? What it will support. So if you have to take inputs of fertilizers and other things and water and all that other stuff to grow vegetables in a place in an arid area that can't support it, then you've done nothing. And again, I'm not going to get into whether to eat meat or not. That's a personal decision. It's just, if you do eat meat, then you should eat meat that's raised sustainably and environmentally sensitive and that kind of thing. And stay away from all kinds of institutional industrial foods, whether it be plant-based out of a laboratory or animal-based out of a factory.
Well said. Yeah, I think that's a very good point. So, well, Carrie, thank you so much for this interview. Are there other topics that we haven't covered that you'd like to get into?
Oh gosh, I can spend all day with you guys. I mean, like I say, I always enjoy the the comments that come back after I do these things. I just want everybody to know that when we started in 2003 with a handful of people in a room, that we had no idea that that grass-fed would be part of the conversation at the grocery store, because at that time it wasn't. And the other thing is everybody assumed that everything was grass-fed. So that was another way of kind of bringing this to the forefront. And then having the Green New Deal being brought forward, and rightfully so, it created controversy, which it should. We created controversy when we started, and now we're past that point. All right, let's look into it. Let's figure out how we can make this change, because we've seen in the last 90 days dramatic change in the way we've lived. So I'm hoping that we can have a civil, fruitful conversation about transformational change in agriculture in the United States. Just quickly, I was on a call 2 days ago with a group from around the globe in their own countries, and we're all talking to each other about how do we change things. Not how do we stop things, how do we change things? And I think that that's really important. And we have to do it at the federal level, and we have to do it at the local level, and we have to make sure that people understand where their food's coming from.
Absolutely. Well, that does remind me that I did want to ask you more about the policy issues that you're promoting. American Grassfed.
Yeah, and like I say, I could go on for days, but I'm not really sure, but again, I just want to make sure that everybody understands that we appreciate what you all are doing, and we're going to look at the whole picture.
Sounds good, Carrie. I'm afraid your internet connection has gone bad again. So I think I was going to ask about legislative issues, but I'll just mention a couple of bills that we've worked on with the American Grassfed Association because of the education that you've given us. And I think I see your internet coming back, but I'll just summarize this quickly.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that a lot of the grass-fed beef, or actually primarily most of it in the grocery store, is coming from overseas. We're actually importing most of our grass-fed beef. So the American Grassfed Association involved us in an important campaign to change the rules about what can be labeled as a product of the USA. So if you'd like to help with that cause and many other good causes to support the grass-fed farmers and ranchers who are providing us high animal welfare, good for the environment, nutrient-dense food, then please go to American Grassfed Association to learn more about how you can get involved. So I'm sorry we've lost Carrie, but this was a great interview. I learned so much from her. Oh, Carrie's back. Okay. Well, Carrie, I just mentioned the campaign that you all have run to correct the mislabeling of meat that is able to be called raised or product of the USA, even though it's coming from overseas, and it might be, chopped into smaller bits when it gets here, but it can be, labeled that way. Do you want to say more about that issue?
Gosh, it sounds like we've got so many things going on that I don't know how I get through the day. We started in 2018 to change the policy for the USDA for being able to label product of the US, put the US product of the USA, on meat coming in from offshore. We called it the 10,000 Mile Meat Campaign. And the way that happens is that if a product comes in from offshore and it is repackaged in any way, then they can stamp product of the USA on it. So we petitioned the United States Department of Ag for rulemaking to change the rule, not the whole legislation, all of which you see happening right now with the cool country of origin labeling, but just for USDA. So we filed a petition in 2018, and we just heard about 4 months ago that they agree with us that they should take a look at it. So USDA does not even have to acknowledge that we filed the petition, and they have. In a matter of days, we got almost 3,000 comments. The majority of them, there were a few detractors, but we expected that, saying, stop this, that we need to take a look at it. So that's really important when you go to the grocery store. If you see product of the USA, you see Product USA, it probably isn't. 85% of the grass-fed in the United States sold at retail is from offshore. And that really eats into the bottom line with American family farms and farmers and those rural economies that we're talking about. And, everything else that goes with it. So thanks for reminding me of that one.
Well, it's very important. And I think it's a good reminder to consumers that it's much better to buy direct from farmers and ranchers. And it's very easy to do that now. A lot of farmers and ranchers are freezing their meat and making it available to ship, in addition to, providing for CSAs or direct farmers markets, etc. There are lots of ways to access grass-fed meat these days. And as I'll mention again, there is a map on the website at American Grassfed, so you can find an American Grassfed certified farmer or rancher and find one close to you and buy direct from them. And then you don't have to worry about being scammed by imported meat. So I will ask you, so we started down the policy track. There are a couple of other pieces of legislation that are very important to the livelihoods of producers and to this greater issue that the Green New Deal presents us with, which is how to get to net zero greenhouse gas emissions in time to have a beneficial impact on the climate. There's the Farm System Reform Act. That's a bill that the American Grassfed Association has worked on. Do you want to speak to the importance of that bill?
Well, again, I think the Reform Act, again, we're talking about federal policy. So I think that it's going to take a while. If we go at it just from the Fed, we need the consumer to weigh in on that one, because everybody thinks that happens over there somewhere. Well, that happening over there somewhere is affecting what you're putting on your plate and how the farmers in that you should be dealing with are being affected. And if we don't act, these farmers are going to go out of business and we won't have them anymore. So not delving into the nuts and bolts of all of the things, but we have 1% of the farmers. I think it's 1 to 5% of farmers, people in the United States that are growing your food. And I think that we need to change that dramatically. And you need to act now, not later. And of course, I look back on my life and I keep thinking I've been doing this how long? But it's time for the consumer to understand that it's up to them. And that's why you all are so important. And we're so important. It's because we're getting the message out to the consumer and not letting it happen by a few people in one small area of the world and in our country. And that's the reform needs to happen now. Yeah.
Well, the moral of the story continues to be: seek out your American grass-fed farmer, buy direct from them. Don't expect to get the grass-fed American-raised beef in the grocery store, and seek out these farmers who are using innovative grazing techniques, integrating multi-species livestock, creating these new and innovative regenerative systems. And if we all do that, and that seems to be with COVID-19, with the horrible situation at the slaughterhouses where workers are dying, plants have been shut down. The federal government has now forced these plants to open despite the fact that they're doing nothing for worker safety. We have a crisis situation. So, even if you could access that meat in the grocery store at this point, would you want to? So, if we all decide to go grass-fed and regenerative today, we would have a bottleneck problem on the supply chain for us because, as you mentioned earlier, we don't have enough capacity at the smaller scale abattoirs, butchers, the local meat processing plants that regenerative farmers and grass-fed farmers are accessing. You mentioned the new bill to help these plants stay open round the clock, pay their workers overtime, keep going during this crisis. But there are a couple other bills that we should mention that are important. The Processing Revival Interstate Meat Act, that's an important one. Would you like to speak to that one?
Are you talking about the Prime Act or the State Inspection Act? We've looked at Prime and we're working with, they're and then also the opening up the State Inspection Act, which is already in place in a lot of states, which would be more, and again, here's my word, more nimble. We could get that up and running a lot quicker than having new legislation at this point, because the folks that already have state inspected processes in place, all they would have to do would be, because they're already adhering to the federal guidelines. So then just allow those folks to sell interstate, across state lines. The Prime Act will take a lot longer to do. Again, we need transformational change to get it done. So we have states that closed down their state inspection processes because they thought, well, we'll just let the feds take care of that. Those come out of mothballs a lot quicker. And like I say, we've got to get things done quickly. We can't sit around and go, well, let's look at this. And that's what, and God love us, but we like to think things through. Sometimes you just got to, my friend Will Harris, he says, a lot of people say ready, aim. I said, ready, aim, let's fire. Let's stop talking about it and see what we can do. So I think with the state inspection legislation that's out there right now, that could be done pretty quickly. And again, we're in a crisis mode. We understand that. We don't want to jump into water without knowing if there's a bottom to it, but we do need to change things now. And so that's where we are with that.
That's great. Well, I didn't actually know that there were state inspected plants that are currently not operating because they are limited to sales of meat processed there within their state's borders. And so if you're if I'm here in Virginia on the edge of DC and DC needs the meat, I can't go in with the meat if I used a state inspected slaughterhouse that actually meets the exact same standards as a federal slaughterhouse. So how much capacity do you think that there is to, yeah.
We're not really sure. I don't have empirical data on it right now, but I do know that some of these state inspected plants are only working with one shift. Mm-hmm. If we open this up, then again, we do things that they can hire more workers, because we're in an unemployment crisis as well. These are good jobs in smaller plants. Mm-hmm. They can take some of the displaced workers that are skilled workers out of the larger plants if they're geographically near them, and put those folks back to work. So I see it as a win-win for not only the processors and the farmers, but for the consumer to say, all right, this was grown in Maryland, but I can buy it in Washington, D.C., which you can't do now unless you go over to Maryland and buy it. And I'm not saying Maryland and Washington are the two, but it should be, and that could be done pretty quickly with just rule changing.
Well, that's great. We'll definitely support that and see if we can get that pushed through. It has been exciting to see that there have been developments. I heard that Iowa was able to get permission from the USDA to activate their state inspected processing plants to package meat for sales outside of Iowa. That happened to take place during the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm sure that was something that Iowa was working on for a very long time before this, but if it takes a pandemic to get it done, then now's the time to make these things happen.
Yeah. Well, I say anytime there's of course, growing up in hurricane land, innovation happens through diversity. Not diversity. What am I trying to say? When you need to adapt and you're in a crisis situation, that's when you kind of figure out how things can work, rather than sitting there and being mired in what's going on around me. How can I make this better? And I think that's really important right now, is that I don't want to sit here and be mired into, oh my goodness, this is a problem. Let's solve the problem. And let's figure out how that could do, rather than sitting around talking about it. And I was very pleased that we've gotten some interest in, again, the overtime situation, that now it's on the federal level. They're looking at it. The state inspection plants, they're looking at it. And before, these things have been looked at for years, and now all of a sudden it's happening. The thing in Iowa was amazing, that it just, and I'm sure as you said, it's been in the works for a long time. And I think the other states looked at that as like, okay, if they can do it, we can do it. And, that old competitive spirit comes out in America, well, there's nothing that they can do that I can't do better.
Well, I have just one last question for you, Carrie. So I want to read a press release, so I'm going to switch my computer real quick. So the League of United Latin American Citizens, LULAC, has made a call for people all over the United States to stop buying meat from the big slaughterhouse companies like Tyson and Cargill and JBS and Smithfield. They're asking for people to boycott this meat until the workers have safe conditions and during the COVID-19 epidemic. But of course, these are the problems at slaughterhouses all the time, that the working conditions are just inherently unsafe. What they're asking for is to slow the meat processing lines so that workers can socially distance by at least 6 feet per CDC guidelines and breathe as they're wearing masks and personal protective equipment. They're asking for paid leave so workers don't have to come to work when they're sick. They're asking for healthcare coverage to take care of the workers who do fall ill, many of whom already have died, many have required hospitalization. Obviously, the human tragedy is what's most horrible, but then you imagine the family is left with this terrible economic situation because of the tragedy that they've experienced. And they're also asking for workers to be tested for COVID-19 for all workers, because we know that asymptomatic people will be able to transmit the disease if they've contracted it. And then they're also asking for protections for the undocumented immigrant workers and refugees who are at these facilities, many of whom have no legal protections to be in the United States. And of course, we also need rest breaks for workers, and anybody who is currently working should be given hazard pay for being the essential workers. And because it's a largely immigrant community working in the slaughterhouses, we need communications about safety protocols in all of the various languages that folks are speaking in the slaughterhouses. So what is, I think that you already are working on the alternative to this system, but because of your expertise in the meat industry, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think that those are basic human rights. Again, we talk about the 5 freedoms for animals. I think we need 5 freedoms for Americans and families and human beings as well. The problem is going to be, and again, I'm going to try, is that if consumers don't know where the meat they're buying is coming from, so they can't fight what they don't know. So labeling is going to be very important, or asking the question, where was this meat processed? Because it's not going to say. And if you say it's from this farm or that farm or whatever, and you get the package that has a pretty little red barn on it, you think, well, this is good. And it may be coming from one of those COVID infected slaughterhouses. So again, I agree that we need to change things, and I agree that, but we have to know where the food is coming from, because the folks that did that petition want you to stop eating factory farmed meat, but we don't know yet where that meat is coming from. So until we can identify it, you can't change it. So that's where labeling comes in. And as far as folks wanting transparency in their food supply, now's the perfect time to do it.
That's great. Well, we'll leave it there. Carrie, thank you so much. And thank you for the work that you've done for so long with the American Grassfed Association. We're very appreciative.
Thank you. All right. I look forward to seeing you in person soon.
I hope so. I'll see you in Florida sometime.
Thank you.